Good evening once again. I'm Erwin K. Roberts, producer of Entertainment Spectrum. I'm stepping out of character a little bit tonight. Mark Alft, our regular host, will be along in just a few minutes with a special guest. Now, there's been a lot of publicity about the movie Platoon, which opened in Kansas City not too long ago and is just as we tape tonight, opened across the rest of the country. The movie is about a platoon of infantry in Vietnam near the Cambodian border in the 60s. It's written and directed by a man who was there, Oliver Stone, who won an Academy Award for the screenplay for Midnight Express. It is a finely produced movie from a critic's standpoint. But we have a guest later on who was there during the same time frame as an infantry member, a medic, and he's going to discuss the pros and cons of this movie with Mark. First of all, let's have a look at a short clip entitled Ambush. And there we have a quick look. The young man played by Charlie Sheen has just been in Vietnam a few short weeks, and he's out on ambush patrol. The film has a real eerie quality about it in parts. It is well put together from a physical standpoint, and it has been seen by an awful lot of vets who have been deeply affected by it. Now, I'm not a Vietnam vet, but I saw a lot of things that I saw that were familiar to me from the military of that era. And I saw a lot of things that weren't, simply because I never went to Vietnam. I will come back in just a moment with someone who did.
Welcome back to Entertainment Spectrum. I'm Mark Alft. I have to apologize to some of you. Last week we promised on this show we would attempt to offend most of the people in the known world. We can't do that tonight. We have something far more important to do. We had as Erwin mentioned earlier, we have a guest with us tonight who was, the gentleman's name is Randy Barnes. He was with the 25th Infantry Division in Vietnam. He was a combat medic, and what that means is he was in the field under fire and taking care of the wounded as the casualties occurred. We had a very short time to talk before we came on, so some of the questions we'll ask will be probably sound a little stilted, but we haven't had time to prepare. The one thing that I can say, I was also a medic, only I was in Germany at the time, and I saw a different aspect of the Vietnam War in that I saw the people who had not been discharged, who were sent to units in Europe, and we saw some of the complications and some of the problems from the Vietnam conflict there. And one of the problems we've had is that those problems still exist. The stress and the trauma is still there, and that we've had several people indicate that they would, several Vietnam vets indicate that they would like to come and talk about it, and then backed out because of the stress and of the trauma that goes along with the film and the going back into the past. We'd like to mention this: there is a serious problem with Vietnam vets, or some, I should say, not all, and it's called post-traumatic stress syndrome. It used to be called the post-Vietnam syndrome, and we'll ask Randy to explain that. But first of all, let me introduce him. Randy Barnes. He's been management consultant, or consulting. He has a management consulting business for about 15 years. So welcome to Entertainment Spectrum.
Thank you.
And thank you. You didn't have that beard in the Army, I know that.
No, no.
Can I ask you how old you are?
I'm 47. I'm 47.
And I'm 40. And I.
Well, had I
That was
been anything but a medic, I would have probably been pops when I was over there.
Okay. How old were you when you went into?
I was 20. I believe I was 27. I believe that was it.
That's kind of old to get into a combat situation.
Well, I had kind of a unique experience. I was in the reserves and had 5 months to go for my 6-year obligation, and during the Tet Offensive in '68, had the luck to be activated and sent to Vietnam.
And how much time did you spend in Vietnam?
1 year, 12 months, regular tour duty.
And how long did that feel?
I still feel it somewhere. It was a long time.
Okay, now we specifically wanted to discuss the movie, excuse me, the movie Platoon. As Irwin mentioned, it's been shown in Kansas City tonight as we're taping. It's open across the country. Just as a veteran who was there, your first impression of the movie, and then we'll go into a little more detail, but just how did the movie make you feel when you walked out of the theater?
Well, I was in tears when I walked out of the theater. I felt very. Actually, I had this a reoccurrence, I guess, of the same kind of feelings I had in Vietnam. I had a lot of anger. I had anxiety, fear, and then I had a lot of remembrances of the things that happened, and kind of put that all together. And took me a while to get myself together after the movie.
Okay, now you indicated you were with the 25th Infantry
Division.
And what exactly was your job? Obviously a medic, but explain your situation if you would.
Well, it's kind of difficult. I was with what they call automatic weapons, self-propelled. I was on a Duster, which is a track like a tank with twin 40-millimeter cannons. And we supported what we call the straight leg infantry unit. We go out with them on infantry sweeps and ambushes and things such as that. So I'd like to make one thing clear. The guys in platoon, the straight leg infantry, the Army, the Marines, the guys that lived out in the bush like that 24 hours a day, my experience is as bad as they were, nowhere near compared with that.
And which is very likely why just at the last minute, I believe, we were supposed to be doing this our last taping, but I think it was just the last minute. One of the Marines who apparently had been in the same area as you were, in which the movie took place, he backed out of it because it was such a traumatic, literally re-experience of the situation.
Right.
Was there anything? We know it was a movie, and it being a movie, it's fictionalized to a point. Was it overall was the authenticity overall correct, or was it? Did you feel it was fictionalized too much, or?
Well, first of all, when you say it's only a movie, that's like saying it was only a beheading, or
obviously, I'm
only a head-on collision or something.
I'm trying to put it in perspective because it was
understand.
designed as an entertainment
Right.
have an entertainment effect. So
Well, I know that it was, but for me, I probably should preface my response to that question. And to me, actually, this is two separate things. In one instance, it's kind of it's almost a documentary, an information tool about Vietnam. Certainly, those of us that served in combat can watch the film, and it's almost like the do's and don'ts, because there were a lot of do's and there were a lot of don'ts in that. Then on the other hand, it was an exceptionally good movie. I thought well acted, the cinematography was great, the storyline, the special effects, whatever. So at least for me as a Vietnam veteran, I kind of, that's why I went to see it a second time, might even go a third time, is that really, there was two experiences there. One was almost the profession of being a soldier, and the other one was the movie part. So the reality of the film, again, as I say, I was in the area where this allegedly took place. I never saw that heavy a jungle. That would be my first comment. And I was all over the Cambodian border from the Parrot's Beak to the Angel's Wing, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail came in. However, the Vietnamese had a lot of agriculture in there, and the minute you hit the Cambodian border, there was jungle. And I noticed they made several comments in the movie, hey, we're in Cambodia, which happened a lot, back and forth. And in fact, a lot of places you didn't know where the hell you were.
there wasn't a barbed wire fence with signs on it.
Right, exactly. So that, to me, one was that heavy undergrowth would have been more like the Delta down in the Mekong Delta, or maybe up in the Central Highlands, also all of the mountainous terrain. Why don't I start out, since I said that, the only other real exception that I take to the movie was the real strong problem between the two sergeants. There were our own troops that got killed by our own troops. Generally, my experience in a combat unit, when there was really that kind of strong hatred among people, it really had to do with doing your job. Because when you went out in the bush, when it came time to take care of business, you could have left those things at home. And the only important thing was staying alive. So really, again, this is to my knowledge, that kind of hatred would exist because some guy got somebody killed, or he didn't know what he was doing, or that sort of thing. Not just simply because they were two different people and didn't like each other. Okay, those two things aside, God, there was a lot of realism in that movie. I remember the ants. The first time the ants dropped out of a tree down my neck, and the feeling of the heat, the humidity, the stark fear. That clip that you showed tonight, I think that portrayed a lot of things that a lot of vets can relate to. The kind of the ghost-like images coming out of the dark, and he's trying to see. I think almost every vet that was there spent every night of his entire life trying to see things in the dark. It's just
either that or seeing things in the dark.
Or seeing things. I mean, you're trying to look through it, and then when you do see it, just the incredible fear that takes over. I mean, people. I can't imagine. I've tried to explain to people the kind of fear that is. I mean, that's a kind of fear that you can taste. You can see, you can smell. You have fear in all your senses. I mean, it's almost like a living thing. That's how frightening. In fact, I felt a fear in that movie during those ambush patrols. The weapons they used, generally those were pretty realistic, although there was a lot of firepower missing that we would have normally had.
So this is one movie that was undergunned.
Yeah, I would say compared to
most of them are way overdone. It's no one could carry that much equipment, but in this case they actually had less than was really there.
There was I didn't see any mortar in it. There were no mortars. They didn't, when they set up at night, they didn't lay out any kind of gun positions so they could call artillery in case they got overrun. Things like that. You saw them carrying around laws, which are light anti-tank weapons, like the old bazooka, but you never saw anybody fire one, although you saw the NVA firing RPGs, which were their bazookas all the time. But I can't say enough other than those two things. I mean, there was a lot of realism there. Also, the conflicts between individuals, the blacks and the whites, how on the one hand they got to go along together, and racism didn't play a part as far as the team went in combat, but yet it was always there. I mean, let's face it, most of the grunt units there's a large majority of them were minorities. Gosh, the fact that everybody made up their own uniform, now that was one thing I kind of giggled at parts in that field. Once you got out of a base camp and you got out in the bush, kind of everybody made their own uniforms.
Whatever fit.
If you liked a turban, then you wore a turban. If you liked a black beret, you wore that. You know, that sort of thing.
Now, looking at it from the medical aspect. Now, of course, neither you or I were doctors. Now, this is something that has to be, I feel, very important. It has to be pointed out to those who've never been in the military. The medic was trained by the Army in a hospital situation. Generally, Fort Sam Houston was where medics got their training. I feel real fortunate to have gotten mine. I was tutored by a doctor in Europe, but the majority went to Fort Sam Houston, learned to be a medic there, and what it was basically emergency medicine. You save what you can, if you can, as quickly as possible, and it wasn't, you couldn't consider yourself a doctor. However, every medic was doc.
Right.
And I had, even when I was in Europe, I was questioned by a doctor. Someone waved to me and said, "Hi, Doc," and he asked me about it, and I pointed out to him that when we were, in Europe, when we were in the field on maneuvers or something, the doctor wasn't there. He was home in bed.
Right.
And we were the doctor. Not that we tried to be a doctor, not that we tried to play doctor or have any such inclination. It was just the fact that if somebody injured themselves, we were the ones they went to, or we went to them, whichever the case was. Now, keeping that in the proper perspective, do you feel, from your experience, and do you feel that this movie is going to create more psychological or emotional problems for the vets who were in those situations and possibly were injured, were wounded, or have had traumatic experiences? Do you feel it's going to possibly recreate or increase the problems, the emotional problems that they might have?
Really,
Or have I gotten into something you
well,
really couldn't?
I'm not really qualified to speak on that, and I don't want to say something. Okay, I'll tell you what my gut reaction as a non-professional.
That's what I'm asking.
If I knew a guy was having a lot of trouble with Vietnam, he still had nightmares, he had flashbacks, he had anything, and he really could not deal with the Vietnam experience yet, I think I would advise him not to go see that movie.
Okay, that's what I'm asking is, your reaction, not as a professional, of course, certainly,
right.
because I've been out of it now for 20 years, and I can put a bandage on or a Band-Aid, but that's about it. You lose a lot of it if you don't use it, and I'm just asking your immediate reaction.
Again, I don't know. It might be a catharsis. It's
entirely possible that it could be a therapeutic type of thing.
Right, exactly.
But rather than take that chance, you'd recommend that they not.
Yeah, just off. My experience in the movie. I was literally talking to the guy walking point, telling him to watch where he was walking and watch his flank and don't bunch up, and watching for booby traps in the trees. And so if I felt that way, a guy that was really over there and had some problems with it,
who was point man would have.
I think, but I don't want to discourage any veteran from going and seeing it. I answered your question.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we wanted.
I did want to point. So you made a comment that I'd like to, just for edification, and I don't really. This is not going anywhere, but there was a great deal of difference between the training that the Army medics received and the Navy corpsman who served with the Marine Corps. Because, well, I don't know why this was, but Navy corpsmen did have a lot more training in not only first aid but minor field surgery. And for example, I was told when I first got over there, Doc, the only thing you do is you keep them alive till the chopper gets there, and that's it. So that was pretty basic if you keep the guy breathing. But a lot of the corpsmen, whether they were with recon or whether they were way out in forward bases, they had to keep guys alive for a long time, and that was more than just starting an IV. So I guess as much as I hate to, I kind of built the Marines up there, didn't I?
Well, I was drafted, and I have no allegiance to anything except, and I say this very proudly, perhaps it's somewhat melodramatic and perhaps a bit corny to some people, but my allegiance is to the United States. And whether I was in the Army, Air Force, Marines, whatever, I was in the Army. It wasn't by choice. I wasn't real pleased. I was drafted at the age of 19. I had just turned 19, and I was torn away from all that, as were many, many others. But I didn't feel, I meet now, for example, Marines who, they're exceptionally proud of the fact that they were Marines. In fact, they still consider themselves Marines. Nothing wrong with that, but I have no allegiance. I was there. I served my time. I think I did a good job, and I hope I did anyway. And that's it. This brings up another point that I'd like to question. First of all, what you said about the Navy corpsmen being better trained, that's strictly military thinking.
Yeah.
There's no way to describe why something like that's done. It's just, it is done. When they hired me, so to speak, they said I would make a great clerk, and I ended up a medic. There's no rhyme or reason. At least at that time there wasn't. But when you were there, you were with. There were Marines involved. There was Army involved. You were
in the area where I was.
Yeah.
No.
Explain what you were going to say, and I was thinking that they were working together.
Okay, now in fact, I can't recall if I even saw Marines. Marines primarily when I got there, which was directly after the Tet Offensive in '68, most of the Marines were up in the 1st and 2nd Corps. And in fact, a large majority of them, at least that got a lot of the press, were in the 1st Corps, Quang Tri Province, up on the DMZ. That was almost a complete Marine operation up there. Down where we were was primarily Army, U.S. Army, and ARVN, the Army Republic of Vietnam. We did see some Navy people, the Mobile Riverine Force, swift boats on the rivers. And then, of course, once in a while we'd see SEALs, or sometimes you'd see all kinds of things. Who knew what they were? They were... Mm-hmm. They went out at night and they did their thing, and they came back during the day and nobody asked any questions.
Considering the uniform of the day, it could have been anything. It could have been anything.
Yeah.
Okay. What I was going to ask was, and you've answered my question in that you don't know, but I was wondering how the Marines and Army, or Marines and Navy, or Army and Navy would get along when they're not, when they're back. Before their next excursion. I
could say this. I mean, there's definitely a brotherhood of combat, and it is true that the Marines do have this esprit de corps, probably more than any other armed forces.
Certainly.
But there's an esprit de corps among combat veterans that you'll find, Marines, Navy, whoever. And in a sense that's good. In another sense, I think it's. I remember being over there. We had all kinds of derogatory terms for people that stayed in the rear, And so,
Thank you very much.
Well, you know what I mean.
Certainly, yes.
But that, as I say, that's in a sense good. That kept you together as a team. But in another sense, it's bad. So where am I going with this? Except to say that when I sit down and talk to Vietnam with a Marine combat vet, we've got a lot in common.
Okay. Now, we're getting a little short of time. A couple of things we wanted to mention. You indicated earlier, just before we came on, was that the platoon was what it was, but if they wanted to show Vietnam as it truly existed, they would have to make 150 movies because of there was combat in so many different areas and different types of combat. Unfortunately, with ultimately the same result, but everyone was in a different situation. Consequently, to effectively portray Vietnam in those years, in the Vietnam years, the Vietnam War, we would have to literally have a movie for almost every situation, and that's something that's important to mention because we have a tendency to look at something and say that's the way it is, or that's the way it was, or that's the way it's going to be, depending on the situation. Whereas we have to remember that there were so many different types or different situations that platoon was just a very small portion of what took place in Vietnam. And one other thing, the excuse me, in the movie, juicers and heads were mentioned. Would you explain what they were, and the question being that could somebody really function under those conditions?
Well, juicers and heads clearly, as the movie shows you, delineates between the people whose drug of preference was alcohol and the others whose drug of preference was pot. And I guess later on, after I left, it was heroin. But that did happen. There was a dichotomy. It was generally between the older NCOs and the younger guys. My unit, I can honestly say this, when you went out in the field, you didn't do that. I mean, it was frowned on to get stoned, to get high when you're out in the field. In fact, in this movie, I think realistically, they show these guys, they don't get high until they go back into base camp. But when they're out in the bush, they're taking care of business.
And if they didn't, they would get, very likely they would get killed, and they would get somebody else killed. And if the guy in front of you is stoned, you don't want him there.
Well, that's true. If, in fact, if you're pretty sure that somebody else is going to get you killed, then there's a fairly good chance he might get killed first.
That's right.
Friendly fire, I can take all that.
Okay. Oh, we're running out of time. Randy Barnes, I'd like to thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience with us. And I guess I really can't say any more than that. We thank you very much for, for explaining the situation and how you're handling it, how you felt about the movie.
Well, thank you very much. I do want to say I hope that everybody goes to see the movie. I think everybody owes it to themselves and to the veterans to go see this movie so they get an idea of what it was about.
However, if you're having emotional problems, it might be something worth considering.
Well, in that case, you already know what it's all about.
That's right. So, thank you, Randy Barnes. I'm Mark Elft. This is Entertainment Spectrum. We can't do anything about the last three. It's over. Thank you for watching. Good night.
14 or 15 centuries ago, maybe? Games they had here must have been incredible. Look at this. Even more face masks. And shoulder pads.
Games were a little more serious than the ones you play for days, and the team that lost would get their heads.
It is a story of greed,
Guys who bet on the game would wager themselves, even their children.